Good morning, everyone. It's Joker, and today we are back with another slime video. And a little late to this. Granted, probably by now the skill fusion tier list has gone up through the month of September, and I recorded that before we got the information on the Wielder of Magic skill fusions. So the next time I update that list, I will also include these units. However, looking at it, we have 5 skill fusions to talk about today that came with this new orange meta with the Milim and Shinsha and the free-to-play Ranga. And that is Wind Trainee, Earth Miron, Wind Diablo, Earth Adelman, and Wind Dino. Now, the funny thing is during the English live stream for the meta change, it had some information on it. And I'm going to go find that information for you real fast, because it's kind of funny. Okay, so here it is, pulled from the stream. So, Trainee. We're going to look at some interesting wording here, which is just, terrible translations from the devs. But increase the wind attack of all allies with the highest attack. Something doesn't sound right there. Now, my job in real life is it literally is being a grammar Nazi. I look at documents all day and I review them and I look for words and phrases that do not make sense. This would be something that I would catch. Increases the wind attack of all allies, so everybody, with the highest attack. How often do you see a unit, multiple units, with the same exact attack stat? Not very often, alright? So, already this is dumb. Okay? And then we go over to Dino. So, he used to be single target, right? Single target win resistance, single target crit resistance. If we look at his new quote-unquote translation, decreases all targets win resistance by 30, so it became an AoE, and then the second part is still a single target. It went from single to AoE single, and that just was very funny to me. Because if we go in-game and look at Dino, that's not what Dino's skill does. So I guess we'll just start with Dino and go over what he does. So, we'll exit out of that. I can't skill fuse him anyway, because again, the stupid rule is you gotta be fucking level 100. So, it went from single target win resistance up to 30% down, and then a single target crit resistance 30% for 2 turns. That's fine when you have a single target nuker that was your Wind Diablo. It made sense. But then you skill fuse him, and he now becomes a AoE win resistance and an AoE crit resistance. So the devs mistranslated that on their own live stream. Funny. So it's now an AoE debuff across the board, which is much better. Which is much, much better, because as of right now, most of the time with our wind units, we're AoEing. Like, we're using, Wind EX Shizu for Jubilee, and she's gonna hit all 3 enemies. And you know what? This Dino skill will actually probably come in pretty handy if you're able to skill fuse him, which unfortunately I can't. So it's not a bad skill fusion, it's just hilarious that it was mistranslated on their own stream. You think they'd catch that, but I mean, it's not a bad skill. Essentially, if you're going to nuke and you happen to have Dino, it's a very low cost skill, 15 points. So it's not like it's not usable. His other skill is the magic resistance down, which costs a little bit more, but it's 35%. So I mean, you combine these 2 skills together for 40 points, and if you have, more than a few to work with, that's actually a lot of debuff right there. That's a lot of extra damage increase between just Dino himself. So this, I think, is a fairly good skill fusion for what it needs to be. Dino as a pure debuffing unit, giving him the power to debuff everybody now is not bad. Now, are there better units that would probably give you a much better damage increase, who also have an orb change or some other kind of ability? Oh yeah, totally. It's going to cost a lot more than 40 points, probably. So, bringing Dino, if you're not really, focused on a wind unit, not really ideal. So he's very specific to a magic unit and a wind unit, because if you're going to nuke with EX Shizu, she ain't magic, so you're not using this. But you can definitely, lower wind resistance and lower crit resistance, unless you're not critting. In this case, then this now becomes irrelevant. And if you're not physical, if you're not magic, then this becomes irrelevant, and then you're only relying on the wind resistance, which, at that point, you really do need to bring somebody else. So very specific, but again, the skill fusions so far like have not been so OP that you like have to do them, right? None of them are. I don't think they're meant to be that. So Dino is the first one we'll go over. We'll just go backwards. Adelman, a really sad unit, right? It was the poison meta along with the taunting meta. They tried to shove a whole bunch of weird defensive mechanics into Earth 2.0. It didn't really work out that well, unfortunately. The poison was pretty much what Vengeance is, but on a very, very nerfed level. It was terrible. I think my mod went like 100 turns and it did like 40k damage or something. It was pathetic. So thankfully Vengeance solved that. But his skill fusion goes from all the way down here. It goes from a 15-point physical attack debuff for AoE, 15% for 2 turns, and then increases the poison damage by 30%, and that stacks forever, and it doesn't go away. So if you poison them, you'll do an extra 30%, 60, 90, whatever. Again, we've already come to the conclusion that poison doesn't do much. But the physical attack nerf, I mean, is fine because it is a defensive-focused meta. So, I mean, you could get some usage out of that. And his other skill is, putting the poison on. So it made sense as far as his kit was concerned as to poisoning and nerfing the enemy's attack. After fusing, it becomes a 20% debuff for 2 turns still, and a 50% stack instead of a 30% stack. So you get a little bit extra nerfing out of this, 5%, and you'll get a little bit extra poison damage, which again, doesn't really do that much. So overall, his skill was garbage, and it's still kind of garbage, right? I'm not looking for poison damage. I'm looking for vengeance damage if I'm going to do anything with a defensive-oriented team. And that's just by virtue of the Earth 2.0 team being old as crap. Over a year old now. So, I mean, this should be one of the last units you ever skill fuse, if you even ever do decide to skill fuse them, unless you do it for, like, the mission, right? The 20 skill fusions on the next the 1,000-day bingo board. If you have to do it, then sure, why not? But I guarantee you'll never use it. So, not a great one, but it wasn't great to begin with, so it didn't really change that much. Wind Diablo arguably got the least amount of help on his skill fusion, because it didn't actually change its percentages, right? So if we look at it, before fusion, it was a guaranteed crit for 1 turn, and lowering a single target's defense by 15% for 1 turn for 25 points. Guaranteed crit, and a 15% defense nerf. After the fusion, it's now a guaranteed crit for 3 turns, and still a single target defense down by 15%, but still for 3 turns, and the cost is still 25 points. So all he did was get a turn extension to 3 instead of 1, which, granted, is decent, right? It's decent, because his attack skill all lasts for 3 turns, I believe. Yeah. So if you use both these at the same time, you're got a 20% attack buff, a 15% defense nerf against somebody, and you're guaranteed to crit for the 3 turns that you have higher attack. So if you combine those together alongside a bunch of other buffs, he could hit reasonable numbers for, again, a unit being a year old. But I would have really, really liked to see this go up by any amount. Defense by 15% really doesn't mean jack crap nowadays, when they have such high defenses. 14k, 15k, 20k on the Summer Memories beatdown battle. Now, granted, they had Trainee lowering their defense, so they had to account for that. But 15% down, that doesn't mean anything nowadays. No, and you're not an EX unit, so you're not doing, an incredible amount of damage on your EX ult either. So his skill, unfortunately, is just not that good. Not that impressive. They didn't up it. They didn't give him some extra ability or something like here, because guaranteed crits, like the hero's here. Guy is here. Fire Millum still exists, right? We have a few units, one of which is still one of the 2 best units in the game, giving people crits. And then the third one is not far behind her in, Guy. He's just only physical units, still. That's still pretty good. So, guaranteed crits doesn't make me jump for joy. So, also, again, okay, not good, not good. Trainee. We'll skip Miron for now. Trainee's skill fusion. I wish it was a bit better. It's not a bad skill, right? This is a really, really good skill for a blue-focused team who needs to ult-rush for an EX ult. 15% wind attack for the ally with the highest attack by 15% for 2 turns. I said 15% twice. So it's a 2-turn wind attack buff. If you're just using her to buff your ult gauge, this doesn't matter. Like, this has no factor in your gameplay. It's this that you want. Secret skill gauge the ally with the highest attack by 35%. That's still very good. You know, EX Aqua does 40%, so there's not much of a difference there. It's a good skill, especially on a blue-focused team that has a lot of points to play with, that you need maybe 1, maybe 2, maybe even 3 EX ults. Good skill, alright? Which is why they didn't do much to it. So after fusing it, wind attack by 20%, all allies wind attack. Everybody gets a wind attack buff. Now, are you running a team full of wind units? Maybe, maybe not. Again, this first part of her skill is almost doesn't matter, right? Because you're probably using her in place of Aqua, trying to buff up Guy, trying to buff up Megamine, trying to buff up, you know, I guess in this case, Wind Shuna, right? The furry Shuna. This wind attack would make sense, technically, if Shuna didn't already give herself wind attack. So... But also, Shuna's raising her own ult gauge anyways, so don't really need this. So that's inconsequential. 35% ult gauge though. This didn't change. I kind of wished it did. You know what? I actually kind of wish they made it slightly worse, but made it more generalized. I was hoping that they would do ult gauge of everybody by 30%, 25% even, across the board. Kind of like a miniature Warrior's Mind Rimuru, but just generalized. But they didn't. They didn't touch it. They only gave her 5%, and they gave it to everybody. It's still a good skill. It's just not a good upgrade, is what I'm going to put it at. So, unfortunate. But they didn't want to make her too overpowered for such an old unit, I guess is their thinking. I don't really know. I mean, I do wish they had given this a little bit more. Or changed it to everybody, and not just the single ally with the highest attack stat. Because sometimes that can screw you, because sometimes, you know, your nuker doesn't start with the highest attack stat, right? The Shuna, right? The furry Shuna, she doesn't want a high attack stat. She wants a really high defensive stat. And yes, she does raise her own ult gauge by herself, so it's not really necessary to bring Trainee. But in some scenarios, sometimes your nuker you don't have dupes in them. They're an EX unit, and you have more dupes than like your old support characters, and they have a higher attack stat. And sometimes this just doesn't work out, which is why I wanted this to be more general. So it's a good skill. It could have gotten a better upgrade. And now moving on to the last unit, Miron. Earth 2.0 Miron came out with Adelman during the poison meta, still a defense meta, and I mean they did okay. With this skill, they couldn't do too much to it, but they did stuff to it, I guess is how we'll put it. So looking at it, she was the first unit to have the stat swap, but she swapped stats for everybody, which is part of why it's a 55-point skill. So the furry Shuna swaps her stats and gives herself the 50% wind attack buff. It's really good because you want high defense, so you could swap it to high attack. So this will do the same thing, but for everybody. So on a team where everybody's defensive stats are really high, and you swap it, then they can be, you know, semi-reliable nukers. And then increases all allies' earth attack by 10% for 1 turn, and it increases by 10% every 2 turns to a max of 60%. Now, every 2 turns, it starts at 10%. So turn 1, okay. Turn 2, it goes up to 20%. Turn 3, nothing. Turn 4, 30%. Turn 5, nothing. Turn 6, 40%. Turn 7, nothing. Turn 8, 50%. Turn 9, nothing. Turn 10, 60%. 10 turns. 10 turns to get to the max power buff of 60% earth attack. Alright, I already didn't really like this skill because it took so long. You can use it anywhere up to and including turn 10, right? You could get the 40% attack buff or the 50% or the 30%. You could use it whenever you wanted, but for maximum power, you had to wait 10 turns. And I personally don't really want to be in a fight for 10 turns. Okay? They just take forever. So, and the stat swap is cool, whatever, fine. So the skill was already meh, in my opinion. After the fusion, it's still a stat swap. They can't do anything to that. I mean, I guess they could have been like chance to reverse stats and then attack buff on top of the earth attack buff. They could have done that, maybe, but they didn't. And then increase all allies' earth attack by 15%. And now it goes up by 15% every 2 turns to 90%. So turn 1 is 15, turn 2 is 30, turn 3 is nothing, turn 4 is 45, and it kind of goes up and up and up. So I believe, if math serves me right, which sometimes it doesn't because I suck at math, it still takes 10 turns, right, to do it. So they didn't actually cut out the time frame. They didn't make it easier for you to cap out. They just gave you a higher cap and gave you a little bit extra. So you can hit the 60% faster that it used to be at, but hitting the 90, that's going to take a while. So you're still in the fight for a long time. It's still 55 points. So I, again, am not overly impressed by this skill. Will you find use in it? Maybe. Maybe, if you're running a full defensive team like that. But, again, like, At this point, Vengeance is your defense team, and I'm not looking for big mommy damage out of Miron or Raphael or Shuna, because they're just not going to do it. I'm looking for big Vengeance damage. 500,000 a hit every single turn, starting from turn 5. And that's going to do oodles of boodles more damage than this stat swap and 90% earth attack after 10 turns. Nothing lives after 10 turns almost with Vengeance. So it's just not a good skill fusion for realistically not a great skill to begin with. So do I recommend you fuse any of these? Not really. Not unless you really have to. Surprisingly enough, I think Dino's is the best, being a support unit. They didn't do enough to Trainee. Miron's is meh. Diablo only got a turn extension, and you're trash. So realistically, Dino's the most useful out of these 5 options, which isn't really saying that much, because he is still wildly specific to make use of all of his skills. So it is what it is. Hopefully the next batch of skill fusions for the 2-year anniversary will be much more impactful and much better on units that are just already good and get better in higher value ways. Because Trainee is a good unit who technically became a bit better, but only a bit. Not enough to make a real difference. So let me know what you guys think on these 5 skill fusions. I will rank them at the end of October. But that's it for me. Take it easy, guys, and I'll see you all later.